The warning was always there. That is the part that breaks him. The Galactic Council's language analyst sits alone in Archive Vault 7, surrounded by dead alphabets and extinct grammar trees. He has spent his life translating threats, treaties, and surrender pleas from 1,000 species. Nothing surprises him anymore. Until the human file opens. It is old. Older than Incident Zero. Older than the blackout that erased an entire star system in less than 1 minute. The metadata says the message was received, logged, archived, and ignored. The title reads, Untranslated, Human Origin. At first, he assumes corruption. Human languages are messy. Too many metaphors. Too many layers. Too much silence between words. The Council once decided humans were emotionally expressive but strategically primitive. That judgment still stands in the official records. The analyst activates the reconstruction engine. The symbols stabilize. Clean. Precise. Calm. No threats. No demands. No plea for mercy. Just a message. This is our only response. His spines tighten. Humans were not part of any alliance back then. They had no fleets at the borders. No seats in the Council. No reason to speak at all. Yet they sent this message to every major relay hub in the galaxy. The analyst scrolls. We have identified a pattern of expansion, consumption, and silence. That line refers to the same force the Council later labeled an anomaly. The same force that would trigger Incident Zero. The same force the Council failed to stop. The analyst's breathing slows. Humans named it first. We will not debate this. We will not escalate publicly. Why say that unless escalation was already calculated? The analyst checks the timestamp again. The warning predates the disaster by 3 cycles. 3 cycles of Council meetings. 3 cycles of mockery. 3 cycles where the human transmission remained untranslated. He continues. If this message is being studied, then you have already made your choice. The room feels smaller now. There is no hatred in the syntax. No fear markers. No aggression patterns. The tone is flat. Controlled. Almost gentle. The analyst realizes something that no historian ever noticed. This was not a warning meant to be understood quickly. It was meant to be proven correct. He reaches the final lines. We respond only once. This is that response. The archive auto-links to Incident Zero. Sensor logs. Emergency signals. The moment a star system went dark without battle debris, without radiation spikes, without survivors. Clean. Total. Final. The analyst's hands shake. Humans did not retaliate after Incident Zero. They did not announce war. They did not explain themselves. Because this was the explanation. The chilling realization settles in his mind, cold and absolute. Humanity did not respond to the disaster. The disaster was the response. The file was not supposed to be there. That was the analyst's first thought as the archive terminal finished loading. Archive Vault 7 only stored sealed records, material judged irrelevant, incorrect, or politically inconvenient during the early expansion era. Most of it was debris from forgotten committees and extinct civilizations. This file was different. Origin, human status, untranslated archive tag, low priority, no action required. The analyst leaned back in his chair, crest feathers lifting in discomfort. Humans again. Every time their name appeared in old records, something had gone wrong later. That pattern was unofficial, of course. Not logged. Not discussed openly. But I felt. He activated the file. A simple data packet unfolded. No encryption. No obfuscation. No defensive counterlogic. That alone was strange. Species without power hid their messages. Species with power wrapped them in threats. Humans had done neither. The opening marker was a timestamp. It made the analyst pause. This message had been received 3 standard cycles before Incident Zero. His fingers slowed as he scrolled. At the time, humans were classified as a minor, noisy species. High population density. Internal conflicts. Rapid technological growth paired with unstable diplomacy. The Council summary from that era used the phrase, statistically irrelevant. Yet here was a galaxy-wide broadcast routed through official relays. How did this pass authorization? He murmured. He pulled up the routing history. The answer was immediate and unsettling. It hadn't passed authorization. The human message had not requested Council approval. It had used an emergency civil contact protocol, one designed for first contact disaster warnings. The system accepted it automatically, logged it, and sent it everywhere. And then the Council ignored it. The analyst opened the first layer of annotations. Old comments appeared in faded glyphs, written by predecessors long dead. Human syntax is inefficient. The message lacks an actionable proposal. Tone emotional, speculative. No verified threat source. He felt a flicker of irritation. These notes were sloppy, lazy. He could already see structural patterns in the human phrasing. Tight, minimal, deliberately constrained. He initiated linguistic reconstruction. The human language engine warmed, its ancient heuristics activating. The text sharpened, characters aligning with mathematical precision. The message began without greeting. No council address. No species identifiers. No request for attention. Just a statement. This message is sent in accordance with first contact emergency protocols. That line was important. Humans were invoking law, not diplomacy. The analyst leaned closer. We have identified a repeating pattern of expansion, consumption, and systemic silence. The phrasing was neutral. No accusations. No emotional spikes. Humans were describing data. The analyst cross-referenced the phrase systemic silence. It did not match any known political or military terminology of the era, but it matched something else. Sensor blackouts. Unexplained voids. Regions where ships stopped transmitting without wreckage or distress calls. Early anomalies. The ones the Council had voted to classify as navigation errors. The analyst swallowed. The humans continued. This pattern does not negotiate. This pattern does not retreat. 2 short sentences. Perfect symmetry. Declarative. Final. The analyst noticed something subtle. There was no suggestion of future tense. Humans were not predicting. They were stating conclusions. He scrolled further. We will not present demands. We will not request an alliance. Why include that unless the Council expected such things? Unless humans understood how the galaxy worked better than the galaxy understood itself. The annotations resumed. Humans appear to exaggerate the threat scale. No evidence provided. Speculative framing. The analyst's mandibles tightened. The evidence was there, compressed, referenced indirectly, embedded in phrasing meant for those willing to investigate. But no one had. He opened the routing logs again. Every major power had received the message. Every one of them had marked it non-urgent. The analyst continued. We are issuing this notice once. Once. That word appeared again later. Humans did not waste words. Repetition meant doctrine. If corrective action is taken, no further communication will follow. That was not a threat. It was an offer of silence. Silence as reward. His internal threat assessment instincts began to stir. The next paragraph was shorter. If corrective action is not taken, we will act in containment. Containment. Not retaliation. Not defense. Containment. The analyst froze. Containment was a term used by species that believed themselves outside the problem. Observers. Custodians. Jailers. Humans had no legal authority to use that word. Yet they did. He checked the final annotations before Incident 0. The last comment was almost casual. Humans overestimate their strategic relevance. The analyst felt a cold pulse of anger. Not outrage, something quieter. More dangerous. He reached the final section of the message. No signature. No species seal. No council-approved closing. Just 4 lines. We have mapped the outcome. We have measured the cost. We will not repeat this warning. Then the last line. This is our only response. The analyst stared at it for a long time. At first glance, it seemed incomplete. A response to what? There had been no prior conversation. No exchange. No provocation. Unless the humans believed the pattern itself was speaking. Unless the galaxy had already been warned by absence, by disappearance, by silence, and chosen not to listen. The analyst leaned back slowly, his reflection faint in the glass of the terminal. He opened a secondary panel and pulled up Incident 0. The erased system. 1 star. 6 inhabited worlds. Total signal loss in 52 seconds. No debris. No energy spike. No escape pods. Clean. The official conclusion had been unknown catastrophic failure. But now, reading the human message again, the analyst saw the alignment. The timing. The language. The restraint. Humans had not reacted after Incident 0. They had acted because no one reacted before it. The analyst closed the file and marked it active. For the first time in his career, he bypassed council review. He whispered the archive title aloud, testing how it sounded. The untranslated warning. His crest flattened in fear as the realization settled deeper, heavier than before. This file did not exist to explain the past. It existed to explain why there would be no second warning. The analyst did not sleep. He returned to the archive before the primary lights of the council complex even warmed. Vault 7 greeted him with the same cold stillness, but now it felt different. Like a room that knew it was being watched. He reopened the human file. Not to read it again. To dissect it. Most analysts searched for meaning in words. Humans, he was learning, hid meaning in what they refused to say. He activated a deep structure analysis, one rarely used anymore. It stripped emotion markers, cultural flourishes, and rhetorical excess, leaving only intent vectors and constraint patterns. The result unsettled him immediately. The human message showed extreme linguistic restraint. Not low intelligence. Not simplicity. Control. Each sentence carried a compressed load of implication, carefully trimmed to avoid escalation. There were no adjectives describing the threat. No metaphors of destruction. No dramatization. That was not how fearful species wrote. That was how disciplined ones did. He isolated the opening statement again. This message is sent in accordance with first contact emergency protocols. That line alone bypassed dozens of council filters. Humans had studied interspecies law deeply enough to know which rule could not be ignored without political cost. They had not begged for attention. They had forced responsibility. The analyst ran a comparative scan. When other species sent emergency warnings, their messages showed panic spikes, erratic grammar, emotional redundancy, escalating phrasing. The human message showed none. Its emotional variance was almost flat. Like a military report, the analyst whispered. No, not exactly. Military reports still contained urgency markers. Humans had removed even those. He moved to the most disturbing section. We have identified a repeating pattern of expansion, consumption, and systemic silence. 3 nouns. No adjectives. No value judgment. The analyst ran probability trees. Humans could have written violent expansion. They could have written about genocidal consumption. They could have written deliberate silence. They chose none. They described behavior without assigning a motive. That was not moral framing. That was diagnostic framing. He felt a chill ripple down his spine. This was not a warning written to persuade. It was written to document. He highlighted the next lines. This pattern does not negotiate. This pattern does not retreat. Again, pattern, not enemy. Humans were not speaking to an opposing intelligence. They were describing a natural force. The analyst pulled historical comparisons. Ancient council archives contained similar phrasing, but only in one context. Containment advisories for stellar plagues. Reality-eating anomalies. Things you did not threaten. Things you isolated or removed. His throat tightened. He scrolled further. We will not present demands. We will not request an alliance. This section had confused earlier reviewers. They had labeled it politically incoherent. The analysts saw it clearly now. Humans were refusing leverage. No demands meant no bargaining. No alliance meant no shared responsibility. If action failed, the blame would be singular. Humans. He ran a risk assessment overlay. This phrasing reduced the chance of preemptive retaliation by other powers. It framed humans as observers, not competitors. That was deliberate. They were trying not to trigger fear. The analyst paused the scan. Why? He asked the empty vault. Why would a species capable of such foresight choose to downplay itself? The answer formed slowly. Because they did not want anyone interfering. He continued. If corrective action is taken, no further communication will follow. Earlier analysts had mocked this line. Arrogant, one note read. The analyst felt something close to dread. This was not arrogance. It was trust. Or rather, conditional mercy. Silence as proof of success. The humans were saying, if you fix this, we will disappear. That was not how conquerors spoke. That was how guardians spoke. His claws tapped the console as he reached the most debated word. Containment. The analyst pulled up linguistic histories. The human term mapped closest to controlled removal with minimal collateral. Not war. Not punishment. Not revenge. Containment assumed inevitability. Something was coming. The only choice was where it would be stopped. He checked the emotional profile again. No anger. No fear. No triumph. Just resolve. Then he reached the closing lines again. We have mapped the outcome. We have measured the cost. That line carried something new. Acceptance. Humans were not asking if the cost was worth it. They had already decided. The analyst leaned back, his mind racing. Species that feared loss tried to avoid cost. Species that sought power justified cost. Humans had measured it. That implied prior sacrifice. Simulations. Internal losses. They had paid something already. He felt his breath catch. What had humans tested before sending this message? The final line pulsed faintly on the screen. This is our only response. The analyst reran translation variants. Every model returned the same structure. Not the first response. Not a formal response. Only. That word did not belong in diplomacy. It belonged in doctrine. The analyst opened a side archive, human cultural fragments recovered much later. Military codes. Disaster ethics. Crisis response philosophy. A phrase surfaced again and again across centuries. Say it once. Act forever. He closed the archive window slowly. The earlier council notes returned to his display, mocking their ignorance. Humans are emotionally expressive. Excessively verbose culture. He almost laughed. Humans were not verbose here. They were restrained to the edge of silence. And that restraint was the most terrifying part. Because restraint meant choice. The analyst pulled up a synchronized timeline. Human warning sent. Council debates delayed. Committees formed. Threat downgraded. Then, nothing. No follow-up message from humans. No reminders. No escalation. Just quiet. 3 cycles later, Incident 0 erased a star system that sat directly along the projected expansion vector humans had described. The analyst's claws dug into the desk. Humans had not panicked when ignored. They had not argued. They had proceeded. The analyst finally understood the true function of the message. It was not meant to stop the council. It was meant to absolve humanity. A record. A timestamp. A moral boundary. We warned you. He closed the file again, his heart heavy. The galaxy had always believed humans were loud. He now knew the truth. Humanity's greatest weapon was not firepower. It was the ability to stay silent, until silence itself became the punishment. The analyst had spent his life believing Incident 0 was the beginning. Every historian did. It was taught that way in academies, summarized in council briefings, reduced to a single phrase. The first true galactic catastrophe. Everything before it was labeled prelude, chaotic, fragmented, poorly recorded. Humans changed that. He opened the temporal correlation grid and overlaid the human warning with deep space telemetry from the years before Incident 0. What emerged made his stomach tighten. The pattern was there. Not obvious. Not dramatic. But precise. Entire trade lanes had gone quiet for minutes at a time. Long enough to trigger panic. Then return to normal before investigations could be authorized. Autonomous probes vanished at the edges of mapped space. Sensor buoys reported null readings. Not static, not interference, but absence. The council response to each event had been the same. Delay. Reclassification. Silence. The analyst scrolled through archived meeting transcripts. Likely sensor drift. False positives caused by overextended arrays. No confirmed hostile intent. Humans had seen the same data, but they had interpreted it differently. He accessed the human pre-Incident 0 models, recovered only after first contact, long after the damage was done. At the time, they had been dismissed as paranoid projections. Now, viewed alongside the warning, they were terrifyingly accurate. Humans had not just noticed the disappearances. They had mapped them. Vectors unfolded across the display, ghostly lines tracing invisible movement through star systems. The pattern was slow, patient, avoidant. It bypassed defended regions and fed on peripheries. It behaved like something learning. The analyst's breath shortened. The council had assumed intelligence required communication. Humans had not. One model caught his attention. A simulation time-stamped months before the warning. It predicted a total loss event, complete system silence, within a narrow probability band. That band aligned perfectly with Incident 0. How did you know? He whispered. He pulled up the model notes. Human analysts had not assumed motive. They had assumed optimization. Whatever the pattern was, it avoided resistance, reduced exposure, and eliminated observers. That was not rage. That was efficient. The analyst opened a human analyst's commentary, preserved in untranslated form. If it speaks, it can be reasoned with. If it does not, it must be contained. That line echoed painfully with the warning message. Humans had already reached the conclusion the council feared most. The analyst continued deeper. Human simulations included contingencies the Council had never considered. Not evacuation plans, not negotiations, but removal. Entire star systems marked as sacrifice zones. The analyst recoiled. Monsters, he muttered, then stopped. The human notes continued. Containment requires loss. The question is not whether we pay it. The question is who. The analyst felt something twist inside him. Humans had not planned to save everyone. They had planned to save the rest. He reviewed the timing again. The warning had been sent after humans finalized their models. Not before, meaning they had already decided what they would do if ignored. The Council had believed humans were bluffing. Humans had believed the Council would fail. The analyst accessed diplomatic logs from the same period. Humans had quietly withdrawn from several border agreements. They had rerouted civilian traffic away from specific regions. They had shut down colonies without explanation. At the time, these actions were logged as internal instability. Now they looked like an evacuation. By the void, the analyst breathed. Humans had prepared in silence. He overlaid one final layer. Human fleet movement logs, recovered much later and declassified only after enormous political pressure. There it was. A task group positioned within striking distance of Incident Zero's star system before it went dark. Not a full armada. A surgical unit. Minimal mass. Minimal signature. Enough. Humans had not arrived in response. They had already been waiting. The analyst leaned back, his thoughts heavy. This changed everything. Incident Zero was not a surprise escalation. It was a predicted intervention. The Council had debated. Humans had calculated. The Council had asked for certainty. Humans had accepted probability. He returned to the human warning again, seeing it now with brutal clarity. We have mapped the outcome. They had. We have measured the cost. They had done that too. The analyst opened casualty estimates from the human model. They were brutally honest. No euphemisms. No softened language. Millions. Possibly billions. A system erased to prevent a wave that would have consumed dozens more. The analyst felt sick. Yet beneath that sickness was something worse. Respect. The Council would have waited for confirmation. Humans had acted on projection. The analyst remembered old Council doctrine. Action without consensus is the highest crime. Human doctrine was different. Inaction in the face of certainty is worse. He closed the projections and stared at the darkened display. Humans had not hidden this. They had warned the galaxy. They had given time. And when time ran out, they had not asked permission. The analyst realized now why the warning had been written the way it was. Why it lacked threats. Why it lacked emotion. Why it ended with finality. It was not a debate invitation. It was a receipt. A time-stamped moral record. You were told. You chose delay. We chose containment. The analyst felt a chill as a final realization settled in. If Incident Zero had been a test, then the galaxy had passed nothing, and humanity had learned everything it needed to know about how the Council responded to extinction-level threats. He shut down the archive slowly. For the first time, he understood the true meaning of the era's name. Early mistakes. Not humanity's. The galaxy's. The analyst had always believed the Council chamber was a place of wisdom. That belief did not survive the transcripts. He accessed them reluctantly, pulling sealed records from the era-marked pre-incident deliberations. Most had not been reviewed in centuries. They were preserved not for insight, but for tradition, proof that the Council had discussed things, even when it failed to act. The first session loaded. The human warning had been on the agenda for exactly 6 minutes. 6. The analyst watched the holographic reconstruction unfold. Delegates shimmered into view, towering, radiant, armored in cultural displays of authority. The chamber buzzed with overlapping translations, confidence thick in the air. The human message was summarized by a junior attaché. Not read aloud. Not projected in full. Summarized. The analyst's mandibles tightened. A senior delegate interrupted before the summary finished. We are not here to debate speculative human paranoia. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Actual laughter. The analyst paused the playback. He stared at the frozen scene, crest feathers pressed flat against his skull. This was not ignorance. This was a dismissal. He resumed. A representative from a core world trade bloc spoke next. Humans see threats everywhere. It is how they justify their internal conflicts. Several delegates signaled agreement. Another added, if such a pattern existed, our sensors would have detected it. The analyst almost choked. They had. But the council had reclassified the data to avoid panic. The human warning had included cross-references. The analyst could see them now, highlighted and ignored. Sensor logs, trade route anomalies, missing probes. None were discussed. A military liaison spoke briefly. Even if the human projection were accurate, unilateral action would destabilize the region. That line earned more laughter. The analyst felt something cold settle in his chest. Humans had anticipated this reaction. That was why the warning avoided urgency markers. Why it avoided moral framing. Because urgency triggered politics. Politics delayed action. The council president concluded the session with a gesture of finality. We will monitor the situation. No further action required. The file stamped itself closed. The analyst sat in silence. Then he opened the next session. And the next. Over 3 cycles, the human warning reappeared 6 times. Each time, it was shortened. Each time, its tone was reinterpreted. By the final session, the message had been reduced to a single line in the agenda summary. Minor species raise hypothetical external threats. That was all. The analyst's claws curled involuntarily. He pulled up marginal annotations, private comments exchanged between delegates. They were worse. Humans desperate for relevance. Overdramatic species, statistically prone to conflict narratives. They will escalate if ignored. They always do. That last comment lingered. The analyst whispered, no, they didn't. Humans had not escalated. They had gone quiet. And that silence had been misread as submission. The analyst opened a classified side-channel transcript, never meant for archival release. A candid exchange between 2 senior strategists. If humans act alone, they expose themselves. Agreed. Let them make the first mistake. The analyst's vision blurred slightly. The council had gambled on human restraint. They had believed humans needed approval. They had believed fear would stop them. The analyst closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. When he opened them, he pulled up the final pre-incident 0 session. The date glowed faintly. 2 days before the blackout. A minor delegate mentioned unusual sensor readings near a peripheral system. The analyst leaned forward. The response was immediate. Coincidental. Unverified. Do not overreact. Someone joked about another human ghost. More laughter. The council adjourned early that day. The analyst shut down the playback. The silence in Vault 7 felt heavy now, judgmental. Humans had done everything the council claimed to value. They had followed protocol. They had shared data. They had warned without threats. And they had been mocked for it. The analyst understood now why the warning carried no emotional language. Emotion invited ridicule. Calm was harder to attack, but easier to ignore. He reopened the human message one more time and read it alongside the council's comments. The contrast was brutal. Humans spoke with restraint. The council spoke with confidence. Only one of them was right. The analyst accessed post-incident 0 emergency sessions. Panic replaced laughter almost instantly. Delegates shouted over one another. Demands for explanations flooded the chamber. Accusations flew. Someone asked the question that echoed through history. Why didn't the humans warn us? The analyst let out a bitter sound. They had. The footage showed a junior archivist tentatively bringing up the old message. The one now labeled the untranslated warning. The chamber fell silent. For exactly 7 seconds. Then the council president spoke. That is irrelevant now. Irrelevant. The analyst's claws struck the console, harder than intended. Humans had not returned to the council after Incident 0. No explanation. No justification. No apology. The council sent formal inquiries. None were answered. The analyst understood why. The warning had not been an invitation to dialogue. It had been a boundary. Humans had crossed it alone. The analyst leaned back, exhausted. The laughter of the council echoed in his memory, not loud now, but distant, hollow. It occurred to him then that the council's greatest mistake had not been ignoring the warning. It had been assuming humans would try again, that they would argue, negotiate, explain. Humans had already said everything they intended to say, and the galaxy laughed. The analyst marked the final transcript with a personal note, something historians were not supposed to do. This was the moment the Quiet War truly began. Not with fire, not with fleets, but with laughter and the silence that followed when humanity decided it would never speak twice. The analyst stopped calling it a warning. In his private notes, he began to call it a withdrawal. After reviewing the council transcripts, he expected to find some human reaction, an appeal, a protest, even anger. Species that were ignored always tried again. They escalated language, sharpened threats, and begged louder. Humans did none of that. Their communications after the final council dismissal dropped to zero. Not reduced. Not delayed. Zero. The analyst pulled up interstellar traffic logs from the same period. Human diplomatic channels went quiet. Cultural exchanges paused. Scientific symposiums were quietly canceled. Trade convoys rerouted without explanation. To the galaxy, it looked like retreat. To the analyst, it looked like something else. Preparation. He accessed a restricted human cultural archive, long ignored because it was considered philosophical rather than strategic. That had been another mistake. Humans did not separate philosophy from action. A recurring concept appeared across centuries of human texts, translated imperfectly but consistently. Silence is a decision. Not absence. Not a weakness. Decision. The analyst felt a slow, creeping unease. He compared this with council doctrine. Silence in council culture meant indecision, fear, or political paralysis. It was a failure. Humans treated it as an end state. He dug deeper. Human crisis response manuals, civilian, military, and planetary, shared a common principle. Warnings are moral acts. Action is responsibility. A species that warned twice was unsure. A species that warned endlessly was afraid. Humans warned once. Then they acted. The analyst replayed the timeline again. Warning sent. Ignored. Silence. During that silence, humans did not seek allies. They did not ask permission. They did not posture. They withdrew from visibility. He overlaid that silence with classified human activity logs recovered centuries later. The result made his blood run cold. Shipyards went dark, not inactive, but hidden. Energy signatures flattened to background noise. Fleets stopped broadcasting identification codes. Human colonies enacted information blackouts so complete that even their allies lost contact. Humans did not go quiet because they were weak. They went quiet because they were done talking. The analyst found a phrase buried in an old human military ethics debate, one that had never been translated into council doctrine because it made no sense at the time. If words fail, words become lies. Humans believed that continuing to speak after being ignored was dishonest. Silence preserved truth. He closed his eyes briefly. The council had mistaken silence for submission. Predators mistook stillness for fear too. The analyst opened a psychological profile compiled long after Incident Zero, when humanity could no longer be dismissed as minor. The profile had been sealed. He understood why. It described a species with an unusually high tolerance for delayed outcomes. Humans could wait, not because they lacked urgency, but because they committed fully once a decision was made. No mid-course corrections. No public debate. No second thoughts. Once humans crossed an internal threshold, the outcome became inevitable. The analyst compared this to the warning again. We will not repeat this warning. Not a threat. A promise. The analyst began to understand the deeper horror of that line. It was not aimed at the council. It was aimed at themselves. A self-binding rule. Humans removed the option of reconsideration. Silence locked their decision in place. He pulled up the first recorded human response after Incident Zero. Not a speech. Not a declaration. A single data packet sent to no one in particular. It contained only navigational corrections, updated star charts with one system marked as inaccessible. No explanation. No justification. The analyst stared at the annotation attached by a later council cartographer. Humans have redacted an entire system. As if that were a clerical oddity. The analyst felt something close to dread. Other species erased systems by accident. Humans erased them deliberately and then moved on. He reviewed post-Incident Zero council correspondence. Formal inquiries. Legal challenges. Demands for disclosure. All unanswered. Silence. The council had interpreted that silence as guilt. The analyst now saw it as something else. Completion. Humans believed the matter was settled. The analyst pulled up one final human cultural artifact, an ancient saying repeated in different forms across centuries. Say what must be said. Do what must be done. Live with it. No clause for regret. No space for apology. Humans did not justify actions after the fact. They justified them before. The warning had been the justification. Everything after was a consequence. The analyst's crest feathers trembled slightly. If this was what silence meant to humans, then the galaxy had misunderstood the most dangerous signal imaginable. Silence was not a pause. It was the sound of a decision already executed. He looked again at the title of the archive. The untranslated warning. It was not untranslated because of linguistic difficulty. It was untranslated because the galaxy did not want to understand what humans were saying. The analyst finally grasped the full implication of humanity's rule. Humans respond only once. Not because they were stubborn, because repeating a response meant the first one had failed, and humans did not allow failure to linger. They corrected it. Quietly. Decisively. The analyst closed the file and sat back, his thoughts heavy. If humans had gone silent once, they could do it again. And if they ever spoke again, it would not be a warning. It would be a conclusion. The phrase appeared everywhere once the analyst knew how to look for it. Not always in the same words. Not always formal. Sometimes it was buried in cultural commentary, sometimes etched into military doctrine, sometimes implied rather than stated. But the idea never changed. Humans respond only once. The analyst traced it backward, far beyond Incident Zero, far beyond humanity's rise to relevance. The rule predated their interstellar age. It came from a time when humans had barely left their home system, when their greatest threats were not cosmic, but internal. That made it worse. This was not a policy invented by power. It was a survival rule forged in weakness. Human historical archives, painfully candid, even about their own failures, showed the pattern repeating across centuries. When humans warned internally and were ignored, disasters followed. When they were warned externally and were mocked, conflicts escalated. Eventually, they learned. The analysts studied one early human doctrine summary, written long before the stars were within reach. A repeated warning is a diluted warning. Humans believed repetition taught others to ignore urgency. If you shouted twice, the second shout sounded less serious. So they stopped shouting. Instead, they built systems that acted when words failed. The analyst felt a tightening in his chest. This was not arrogance. It was a resignation. He found a military ethics lecture given centuries before first contact. The human speaker addressed a room of officers, his tone calm, almost weary. If we warn, we must be prepared to carry the burden alone. If we are not willing to do that, we should not warn at all. The analyst replayed that line several times. Carry the burden alone. That was the core of it. Humans did not issue warnings unless they were prepared to act without allies, approval, or support. They did not expect help. They did not plan for it. The council had assumed humans were bluffing because no species would choose isolation. Humans did not see it as isolation. They saw it as a responsibility. The analyst cross-referenced this with the human warning again. No demands. No requests for alliance. No call to arms. Humans had already accepted they would stand alone. The one-response rule was not about communication. It was about commitment. Once the warning was sent, the decision tree collapsed into a single path. Either the galaxy acted, or humanity would. There was no branch where humans tried again. The analyst accessed a classified post-incident zero internal council analysis, written in panic and never shared publicly. Human behavior suggests pre-commitment to irreversible action. At the time, that assessment had been dismissed as alarmist. The analyst now knew it was understated. Humans did not leave themselves room to reconsider. They designed their doctrine to remove hesitation. He dug deeper into the human response architecture. Emergency protocols were structured with ruthless clarity. Stage 1, identification. Stage 2, warning. Stage 3, action. There was no Stage 4. No review committee. No appeal process. No post-action debate. The analyst compared this to council response frameworks, which branched endlessly. Assessment loops feeding into discussion loops, feeding into further assessment. The council believed flexibility was wisdom. Humans believed it was delayed. The analyst felt a flicker of shame. Incident Zero had happened in the space between Stage 2 and Stage 3, while the council was still talking. Humans had waited exactly as long as they said they would. No longer. He found the moment the rule was invoked internally. A sealed human command log, timestamped days after the warning was ignored. The entry was brief. External corrective action is unlikely. One response threshold reached. No debate transcript followed. No dissent. Just execution orders. The analyst swallowed. Humans did not vote on extinction-level decisions. They assigned them. He reviewed human casualty ethics again, hoping, foolishly, to find hesitation, doubt, protest. There was none. Instead, there was grief. Quiet. Recorded. Acknowledged. Humans did not deny the cost. They accepted it. And that acceptance made the action possible. The analyst leaned back, his mind racing. The one-response rule explained everything. Why humans did not argue after being ignored. Why they did not justify themselves afterward. Why they never explained Incident Zero. Explanation implied reconsideration. Humans did not reconsider. They moved forward. The analyst remembered the Council's greatest fear after Incident Zero. Not that humans had destroyed a system, but they had done so calmly. There had been no victory broadcasts, no triumphal declarations, no territorial claims, just silence and redacted space. The analyst now understood. The response had already been spent. Humans had nothing left to say. He felt a creeping dread as he followed the rule to its logical conclusion. If humans ever issued another warning, it meant they were prepared to act again. And if they did not, then the galaxy would not even receive the courtesy of explanation. The analyst pulled up recent Quiet War incidents, events officially labeled anomalous containment outcomes. Systems sealed, regions restricted, navigation advisories updated without detail. The pattern was repeating, but this time, there was no warning. The analyst's crest feathers trembled, because humanity had already responded once. The one-response rule did not reset. It accumulated. The warning before Incident Zero had not been about that one threat alone. It had been a declaration of policy, a line drawn across time. We will speak once. After that, we will act. The analyst closed the archive slowly. The rule was not meant to scare the galaxy. It was meant to protect humanity from indecision. And now the galaxy lives under its consequences. He understood, finally, why the archives were called the Quiet War. Because in a war where humans had already spoken, silence was not peace. It was a procedure. The analyst had avoided this part. Not because the data was incomplete, but because it was too complete. Incident Zero had been studied for centuries. Every sensor fragment, every gravimetric echo, every last photon that escaped before the blackout had been cataloged, debated, and reinterpreted until nothing new was supposed to remain. And yet, no one had ever asked the question that now felt unavoidable. Not what happened, but how deliberately it happened. The analyst reopened the Incident Zero master file and stripped away the assumptions that had guided every previous investigation. He removed words like catastrophe, attack, unknown failure. He replaced them with a single, neutral term: intervention. The sensor data realigned. Patterns emerged immediately. The blackout had not spread outward like an explosion. It had collapsed inward. Power grids failed simultaneously across multiple worlds, not sequentially, not chaotically. Simultaneity required coordination. Precision. The analyst pulled up temporal micrologs. Planetary cores did not destabilize. Atmospheres did not burn. Orbits did not decay. The system had not been destroyed. It had been turned off. His breath caught. Even the star itself had not gone nova. Fusion had not failed violently. Instead, output dropped below detectable thresholds in a controlled gradient, as if something had wrapped the system in a shell and lowered the volume of reality inside it. The analyst checked for residual signatures. Nothing. No radiation. No exotic particles. No traceable weapons. That absence had baffled scientists for generations. Now it terrified him. Humans had not used force as the galaxy understood it. They had applied containment physics, the kind used only in theoretical models for isolating unstable spacetime regions. The analyst whispered, "You didn't kill them." No, humans had removed them from interaction. He accessed a long-suppressed human technical annex attached to the warning, dismissed at the time as speculative nonsense. The annex described a concept the Council had laughed at: localized causality suppression, a way to isolate a system so completely that no signal, electromagnetic, gravitational, quantum, could cross its boundary. Not destruction, quarantine. The analyst's hands trembled. That required technology far beyond what humans were believed to possess at the time. Unless they had been developing it quietly. The analyst overlaid the containment boundary with the predicted expansion vector humans had mapped before the warning. It matched perfectly. Incident Zero had not been random. It had been placed. He felt a slow, dawning horror. The erased system had not been the target. It had been the seal, a plug driven into the path of something far worse. The analyst reviewed the human casualty models again. He noticed something he had missed before. Human estimates did not assume 0 survivors. They assumed isolation without confirmation, meaning humans did not know if anyone inside the system had lived or died. They had accepted that uncertainty. They had accepted never knowing. The analyst felt his throat tighten. The council had demanded certainty before acting. Humans had accepted ambiguity and acted anyway. He accessed post-incident 0 human internal correspondence, unsealed only after centuries of political pressure. There were no celebrations. There were memorials, names, coordinates, silent acknowledgments of loss. Humans had mourned a system the galaxy pretended had simply vanished. The analyst leaned back, shaken. Incident 0 was not a warning shot. It was a firebreak. A line burned across reality to stop a spreading inferno. The analyst cross-referenced later Quiet War events. Smaller, more precise, less noticeable. Each one showed refinement. Containment zones grew tighter. Collateral dropped. Response time shortened. Humans were learning, perfecting the act of erasing interaction itself. The analyst's crest feathers flattened completely. If this was what Incident 0 truly was, then the galaxy's greatest fear, that humans might destroy worlds at will, was wrong. The truth was worse. Humans could remove worlds without destroying them, and no one could stop them. He reviewed the final council resolution on Incident 0. Cause unknown. Responsibility unassigned. The analyst laughed softly, bitterly. Responsibility had been claimed in advance. The warning had not been a threat. It had been a confession, made early. We will do this if you do nothing. And the galaxy had done nothing. The analyst closed the Incident 0 file and stared at the dark screen. Reframing it changed everything. Humans were not reckless. They were not vengeful. They were not conquerors. They were custodians who had decided the galaxy could not be trusted to protect itself. The analyst felt a heavy certainty settle in his mind. Incident 0 was not the beginning of the Quiet War. It was the first successful containment, and it would not be the last. He understood now why humans never spoke about it. Talking about containment invited debate. Debate delayed action. Humans had already learned that lesson. They would not teach it again. The analyst marked the file with a final note, one that would never be approved for public release. Incident 0 was not a crime. It was a decision. And it worked. The vault lights dimmed slightly as the archive cycle completed. Somewhere beyond mapped space, something had been stopped. And somewhere closer, the galaxy remained blissfully unaware that its continued existence depended on a species that had already said everything it intended to say, once. The analyst understood now why this archive had been sealed so deeply. Not because it contained classified technology, not because it exposed council incompetence, but because it rewrote the shape of history. If this file were ever released in full, the galaxy would have to accept a truth it was not prepared to face. The war had already begun, and humanity had never announced it. He sat alone in Vault 7, the hum of ancient systems steady and indifferent. The final compilation ran silently across his display. Warnings, projections, council laughter, Incident 0 reframed, containment after containment. Not battles. Operations. That distinction mattered. Wars, as the galaxy understood them, were loud. Fleets clashed. Declarations were issued. Alliances formed and shattered. Victory was measured in territory. The Quiet War had none of that. No fronts. No flags. No proclamations. Just regions that slowly became inaccessible. The analyst pulled up the most recent star charts. Civilian-accessible versions still showed a stable galaxy, trade lanes glowing, borders neat and confident. The classified version told a different story. Dead zones, navigation exclusions, systems marked with neutral language, transit unavailable, signal instability, environmental hazard. None of them labeled human action. The analyst felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. Humans were not fighting a war the galaxy could see. They were fighting one the galaxy was surviving without knowing. He reviewed the earliest Quiet War doctrine draft, reconstructed from fragmented human archives. It had no dramatic title, no rallying language, just a single operational premise. If the threat cannot be reasoned with, it must be isolated. If isolation fails, Interaction must cease. Cease. Not destroyed. Not punished. End interaction. The analyst finally understood the strategic elegance of it. The galaxy could not unite against an enemy it could not see, and it could not resist a war it did not know it was part of. Humans had removed the political dimension entirely. There were no enemies to declare war on, only problems to be quietly solved. He accessed internal council intelligence reports from recent cycles. Fear threaded through them now, though never openly admitted. Anomalies were increasing, containment zones expanding, human silence uninterrupted. The council did not know how to respond. You could not sanction a species that never explained itself. You could not negotiate with one that had already finished talking. The analyst leaned back slowly. Humans had not seized control of the galaxy. They had assumed custodianship, not because they were chosen, but because they were willing. That willingness terrified him more than any superweapon ever could. He opened the final section of the untranslated warning archive. A small addendum had been appended long after Incident Zero, written by a different human hand. Much later, never transmitted, only stored internally. The analyst had not noticed it before. It was not addressed to the council. It was addressed to future humans. If this archive is ever opened by others, it means we failed to stay quiet. He felt his breath catch. Silence keeps the war contained. Explanation invites interference. The analyst closed his eyes. Humans believed that being understood would make things worse. Because understanding led to argument. Argument led to delay. Delay led to extinction. He reopened his eyes and stared at the title of the archive. The Quiet War Archives. Plural. Not a single incident. Not a single threat. An ongoing process. The analyst realized something else then. Something that made his crest feathers tremble. The Quiet War did not have an end condition. No victory parade. No surrender. Only continued containment. Forever. As long as the galaxy produced threats it could not see coming, humans would remain silent and active. The analyst stood slowly, the weight of the realization pressing down on him. The galaxy believed humanity was restrained. It was wrong. Humanity was disciplined. They did not act out of anger. They did not act out of fear. They acted because someone had to, and because they had already warned the galaxy what would happen if no one listened. He considered, briefly, whether to escalate this archive, whether to bring it before the council in full, stripped of euphemism and political shielding. He imagined the debate, the disbelief, the outrage, the panic, and then the inevitable delay. The analyst closed the archive instead. He finally understood the cruel genius of humanity's rule. Humans respond only once. Anyone who needed to be warned had already been warned. The rest would never hear a word. As he prepared to leave Vault 7, one final thought settled in his mind, cold and absolute. The Quiet War did not begin with Incident Zero. It began the moment the galaxy chose laughter over listening, and humanity decided silence would be enough.